Hey guys, Loremaster Sotek here, and it is Wednesday, which means it is another weekday for some more Ogre Kingdoms Q&A, as we're halfway through the week. Granted, that doesn't really matter anymore in these times, at least for most of us, but, you know, it is what it is. So, let's go ahead and get started. Our first question today is from Shibimbim, and he asks, what was the role of the Ogres in the end times? Unfortunately, not a lot. Basically what happened was the Ogre Kingdom, so at the very start of the end times, which was like 25-22, a bunch of signs started happening all around the world indicating that the end times were at hand. So volcanoes were going off, there were earthquakes, there were tsunamis, you know, meteors were falling from the sky, just shit was getting crazy. And, you know, the Chaos Moon was like bigger than it's ever been in its entire life or existence, and just all sorts of insanity. And for the Ogre Kingdoms, the Firemouth erupted. And not only did the Firemouth erupt, but almost the entirety of the Mountains of Morn, a bunch of dormant volcanoes that the Ogres had thought were safe were not. So it did kill a decent amount of them, but a ton of things basically exploded, and the Mountains of Morn got covered in ash. And Greasus kind of looked at the situation in the Firemouth and was like, yeah, no, fuck this, we're leaving. So they basically got all their stuff together and moved out. And Greasus united the entirety of the Ogre Kingdom under his iron fist and started heading west. And their goal was to basically just take over the world. Like, the time had finally come for the Ogre Kingdoms to curb stomp everybody. So unfortunately, one thing that I have talked about extensively with the end times is that it started off very ambitious and very well written. You know, if you read the opening pages of Nagash, every single race in the game has something going on. You know, everybody got a mention, and a lot of special characters were in it, and it was super awesome, and it set up the board to be, like, amazing. And then Games Workshop actually started having to write everything out and realize that they were not apparently interested in finishing any of the stuff they set up. So the Ogres were one of the many things that just didn't really get touched. In fact, if you just read, so there were, the main feature of the end times were these really big books. I've got one of them right here. These really, really colossal big books. This one's not going to show up super well because it's got a lot of greens on it. But this is Thankful, and these things are huge. Like, these are massive books. And all of them have a part 1 and a part 2. And the part 1 books are pure lore. Like, no rules, nothing. Just lore. And, like, most of them are, like, hundreds and hundreds of pages. But where was it going? Oh, yeah. So, there were 5 of those. If you were to read through all 5 of them, there was nothing about the Ogre Kingdoms. There were ogres that showed up in a couple of random spots. So, like, Goldfag Maneater played a pretty big part in Thankful. The book I was just holding, he played a pivotal role in the destruction of Carrick 8 Peaks when he betrayed Belagar to help Skarsnik. But, which actually doomed the dwarfs. Like, that was a huge deal in ruining any chance the dwarves had of winning Carrick 8 Peaks. Because if Goldfag had actually stayed on Belagar's team, they probably would have won the fight against Queek. And if they had defeated Queek, then the dwarves probably would have been able to finish off Skarsnik as well. Or at least make enough of a foothold that they could have either left at that point once Belagar came to his senses, or they could have been one of the, like, stronger footholds still to stand, and kept the Skaven from going on to do some of the other stuff they did. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. So Goldfag played a pretty big role. He actually showed up twice in the end times. But in any event, as for the actual Ogre Kingdoms themselves, they never showed up. What we found out outside of the big books, so those are what I call the big books. There was also a full novel released alongside every single one of them. So there were 5 novels that, the way the novels worked is they basically focused in on a particular storyline from the big books. So the big books are usually split into anywhere from like 4 to 6 parts, and each part is massive, but it covers like an entire war. Like every part covers usually somewhere between 3 months to 2 years, depending on what's happening. So they're huge. And each of them cover like big campaigns and massive that lead up to a massive battle, and then they usually have the massive battle. But for the ogres, but anyway, so those side books usually follow just a single character through a story, or follow like a handful of characters. So you don't get like the entire perspective, but it's also a lot more focused in. You get a lot of the more nitty-gritty details. And some of the authors of the small books were a little better about tossing in like cameo appearances of characters, which was good. Like, because there were a ton of characters that just didn't show up at all in the big books, and in the little books they got like snippets. And in the final book, so the 5th book, which is called, I think that one's Rise of the Everchosen, or no, it's Lord of the End Times. Lord of the End Times is the last novel, which covers like a bunch of crazy shit happening leading up to the end of the world. And in that one, we actually get a in-depth look at what Grimgor had been up to during the end times, because Grimgor Ironhide, despite the fact that in book 5 he is easily one of the top 4 most important characters in the book, he does not show up until the very end of the book, and we have not seen him anywhere before then. So Grimgor was a really weird case, because he was a lot of the characters, they didn't show up because they were like, oh, they're just not important to the end. All right, that sucks, but I get it. But like Grimgor was one of the most important characters. You know, he's one of the 8 incarnates, and he just didn't show up until Teclis like teleported him into Middenheim. But anyway, when Grimgor showed up in that final book, that's actually when we got all of the lore dump on what happened to the Ogre Kingdoms. And basically and we've talked about this a little bit, but kind of as a focus for this Q&A, and I'll probably have the end times being the parentheses title, but the Ogre Kingdoms, after all the mountains blew up, they went west, and they, for whatever reason, either because of their alliance with the Chaos Dwarves, or maybe because the Ogre Kingdoms in the past, like when the Ogre Kingdoms were first founded in the Mountains of Morn, they tried really hard to kill the Chaos Dwarves, or to at least like enslave them or beat them up, and they just could not do it. Like the fortresses of the Chaos Dwarves are practically flawless in their defensive design, which is why every time they've been threatened, it's usually from an internal force. So the Ogre Kingdoms were not able to do it then, so it seems to be the case that Greasus either didn't want to risk fighting the Chaos Dwarves, or they bargained with him, or he just wasn't interested in fighting them. But for whatever reason, Greasus avoided the Chaos Dwarves, and he crossed west across the Darklands until he made it to the World's Edge Mountains. And this was probably, the end times lasted in the ballpark of around 4 to 5 years for like everything from start to end. And somewhere in the first 2 years, Greasus Goldtooth and his huge horde of ogres ran into Wa Grimgor, which Wa Grimgor was the biggest, most powerful tide of greenskins the world had ever seen. And so the two armies just slapped into each other in the World's Edge Mountains, and it was this titanic battle of insane proportions where both sides collided, and like things were just mind-bendingly over the top of just, you had tens of thousands of ogres versus hundreds of thousands of greenskins, and it was nuts. And in the midst of the battle, as things were just crazy, Grimgor and Greasus just beelined for each other, because they were both like, oh, that's the boss, and I'm gonna kill that dude. So they had their really, really big fight, and it was not a super swift fight. It was, you know, there was a lot of back and forth, because Greasus is actually much stronger than Grimgor, but Grimgor is much faster than Greasus. Greasus is naturally tougher and takes more to kill, but Grimgor is more heavily armored, so there was like all sorts of crazy stuff happening. And the way the battle finally ends is that either because Grimgor was able to dodge it and get it off of him, or pull it away from him, or simply because... So one of Greasus's famous kill moves is that he has a kind of a bad habit of dropping his weapon and then like grabbing somebody to squeeze them to death. And he might have tried to do the same thing to Grimgor, but when he did that, Grimgor was able to get Greasus's weapon, which is called the Scepter of the Sky Titans. And this thing is like ridiculously scary. The Scepter of the Sky Titans is very, very heavy and difficult to wield, but if someone can pick it up, it grants you, it's a magical weapon, it grants you the strength of a Sky Titan, who were the largest creatures to ever live in Warhammer Fantasy. So if you can pick this thing up, whatever you're about to hit's gonna die, like period, end of story. And Greasus, being as big as he is, cannot dodge. You know, Greasus relies on being unkillable and hitting so hard that anything he's fighting dies in order to avoid death. So he was screwed pretty much the instant Grimgor picked that thing up and he just dropped it on Greasus and killed him. And when Greasus died, all the ogres were like, oh shit, okay, this guy's the new boss. Which was helped by when Greasus killed, when Grimgor killed Greasus, so many G names, what the Wind of Beasts, which had been unshackled from the vortex by that point, was just kind of flying around the World's Edge Mountains looking for a host. And the way the Winds of Magic worked in the end times was that they're not sentient per se, but they are drawn to creatures that have physical and emotional qualities that synergize with them. So the Wind of Beasts was basically looking for the king of all monsters, the wildest, most reckless warrior in existence to bear its strength. And it seems like it was almost waiting for Grimgor and Greasus to finish their duel, because the instant that Grimgor killed Greasus Goldtooth, he somehow in that moment basically proved that he was worthy, and the Wind of Beasts just boom right into him, and he absorbed it and became the incarnate of Beasts. And when he did that, all of the ogres thought, oh shit, that's the Great Maw saying he's in charge. And all the greenskins were like, oh shit, that's Gork and Mork saying he's in charge. So they all unified into what was called the Beast Wa. And the details after that are a little bit scant, but what we do know for sure happened is that either in the third or fourth year at some point, the Carrick 8 Peaks situation got wrapped up, because Golgfag Maneater had gone nearby Carrick 8 Peaks, but he wasn't directly participating in the war. Golgfag was just minding his own business, passing through the area, and Belagar's scouts, the rangers, saw Golgfag down there, and they told Belagar about it because they weren't sure if he wanted to try and like kill him or bargain with him or what. And Belagar decided it would be better to make a deal with Golgfag than it would be to try and fight him. And if he had that mercenary as an ally, they could potentially win the war. But Belagar, as much as I love him, he kind of made a shrewd tactical error, which was basically that Belagar essentially promised Golgfag, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was either like he promised him half, or he promised him a percentage, or like the choice of whatever he wanted from Belagar's treasure vault. But what Golgfag did not know, and what Belagar was very careful to omit, was that Belagar really didn't have a lot of money left. Like, sure, what he had was fabulous by like a human's perspective, but from a super duper greedy ogre, and especially from a dwarf perspective, Belagar was dirt poor. Like, he had almost nothing to offer Golgfag, and was basically just relying on hope, on like dwarven, he was relying on the Maneaters assuming he had a lot of money. And that really backfired on Belagar when Scarsnake also found out that he was there, and Scarsnake basically sent his shaman, whose name I cannot remember very well right now. It'll come to me at some point. He is a really famous shaman. But his shaman went to Golgfag and was like, hey, you should work for us instead. And the man-eaters are like, no, screw that. Like, we're gonna get a dwarf treasury. There's nothing a greenskin could offer us that is going to be worth backstabbing the dwarves, who would be pissed about it. Like, no, thanks, but no thanks. And at that point, the shaman revealed to Golgvag that Belegar was super poor and didn't have anything. And Golgvag knew that Belegar was not fabulously wealthy, but he still was kind of like, I'd rather take my chances. And then Skarsnik slam dunked, which was that Skarsnik, having explored most of Carrick 8 Peaks, and although he personally does not care for treasure very much, knowing its value, he had stashed away, where I don't know how he found it, but he found and had stashed the actual crown of the King of Carrick 8 Peaks, which is one of the most absurdly gorgeous and decadent crowns the dwarves have ever made. And he basically just gave it to the man-eater and was like, hey, if you work for us, you get to keep this and whatever you take off the dwarves when you kill them. And Golgvag was like, oh, okay. So Golgvag betrayed Belegar, and when he did that, the ogres had planned to fight Queek Headtaker and to finish off the dwarves, but Belegar basically set off a bunch of charges that the engineers had installed around the cave they were fighting in, and it started collapsing that part of the hold in on itself. So the ogres were like, screw this, we're out. Like, we're not, this is getting ridiculous. So they left, and there's a point to this, I swear, going back to the Grimgor thing. It's not sure, I'd have to double check the dates to verify when it lined up, but then at some point, Maneater, or Golgvag, joined up with Grimgor's army. So he went east, because his goal was to head back to the Ogre Kingdoms, which weren't really there anymore. And while he was heading that way, he met up with Grimgor's army and joined up with them. And the big thing about that was the big final siege of Zarnagrund, which was kind of the last great battle in the east. Because the Chaos Dwarf, that's the capital of the Chaos Dwarf civilization, and Grimgor hates Chaos Dwarves. Like, Grimgor hates everybody, but he really loathes Chaos Dwarves, because presumably they're the ones that took his eye. And so he led this huge army against them, and even with that army, the dwarves of Zarnagrund were basically untouchable inside of their citadel, until Golgvag showed up. And what happened, kind of like the super famous thing that happened, was Golgvag, with his incredible prowess as a man-eater, and his, super elite man-eater squad of all these ogres trained in all these different styles of warfare and stuff, they figured, it's not said how, but they figured out a way to somehow bust their way into Zarnagrund, and they were able to fight their way to the gate and open up the gates, which let the Greenskins in, and let Grimgor in. And once Grimgor was inside, him and Wurzag just curb stomped the Chaos Dwarves. They got completely butchered. And that was the last real thing we saw the ogres do. Obviously, a lot of them were teleported to Middenheim, along with a good portion of Grimgor's Beastwa by Teclis's super spell to bring all the incarnates together to fight Archaon. And if I remember correctly, none of the named ogres made it that far. They were all either dead or had gotten to the point where they just weren't relevant. So, Golgvag Maneater, for all we know, he either died leading up to that point, or he was not teleported in, or he was teleported in, but for some reason didn't get a cameo in the final siege, which was a shame. There really should have been, a representative of every single race. Because the dwarves didn't get a special character, but they at least had a powerful character in that final battle. Grombrindle showed up, so I guess that kind of counts. And, the ghosts of a bunch of dwarves showed up, High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer and some other guys. But, anyway, so that's kind of what happened to the ogres. So, the TLDR is that you had Golgvag play his pivotal role in the Siege of Carrick 8 Peaks, or the final battle for Carrick 8 Peaks, or war, I guess. Then you had Greasus Goldtooth, which Greasus presumably had all the other special characters with him. So, Scrag the Slaughterer, Brag the Gutsman, and then himself. Those are kind of the big famous ones, but he also had the minor ones there too. and they all seem to have died in that final battle against the Grimgor's Wall, which is a shame. At the very least, it would have been cool to see. You know, I'll tell you guys what, if I ever made enough money that I could hire a team of writers, because I'm not that great at writing, but if I could like be the storyboard or the person that is able to decide what's going to happen, and I had a group of writers, I had enough money to do that, I would just rewrite the entirety of the End Times, probably starting after book 1 to lend it some legitimacy. So, you know, let Games Workshop have everything that happened in Nagash, and then rewrite the story completely from there. Because, god dang, it crashed and burned so hard. Oh my gosh, we spent a long time on that question, but, you know, we probably won't talk about the End Times again for the rest of this series, so, what in the world is happening? My Google Doc format is, like, freaking out. Next up, John Leathers. Okay, some nice words here. Why aren't the ogres able to access the winds of magic like other races? Okay, the big question. Who is more intelligent, the Famir or the ogres? The ogres have this world-spanning empire, while the Famir are swamp boogeymen. And lastly, would an ogre fall for the Impossible Whopper from Burger King, or would he pick up on the ruse? The first part of your question is just a misunderstanding. Ogres can absolutely wield magic. We've talked about it extensively, so I'm not going to go over it again. You can just go back there. When it comes to pure intelligence between the Famir, which are the cyclopean lizard-like creatures that serve the dark gods but live primarily in swamps, and the ogres, Famir, way smarter. Famir are very clever creatures. They're intelligent. It's worth noting that the swamp boogeymen they were once a global power in the Warhammer universe. They are one of the primordial authorities, one of the primordial races that actually had an empire before the old ones ever showed up on the planet. And when the old ones arrived, they started creating all of their own races. And when the old ones started dominating the world, the Famir were one of the many races they battled against. So the early Lizardman Empire fought the Famir a lot. But their ultimate downfall was that after the Chaos Gods came into existence, and, you know, all the crazy shit happened with the Great Cataclysm, and things started to calm down, you know, the old ones were gone, the Lizardmen had been pushed all the way back to Lustra in the Southlands, and a lot of the world was just empty, or was filled with, like, beastmen and other crazy shit. Well, the Famir, they decided, basically at that point, you either were a race that was created by the old ones, so you could avoid throwing in your lot with the Dark Gods because you just fought against them, or you threw in your lot with the Dark Gods to survive the Great Cataclysm when demons were just, like, pouring over the planet. And the Famir were in the latter category. They decided to sign up with the demons in exchange for their survival. And so the demons spared them, but some shenanigans happened where the demons basically created, like, ethereal contracts that would force the Famir to answer the call by anyone who signed one of those contracts, which actually plays a significant role in how they are summonable in the Storm of Magic campaigns, or by Norska. Like, the way Norska actually gets the Famir to help them out is not by true allegiances, it's that the Norskins, or the forces of chaos, have an easier time getting access to those demon-bound contracts, and they're able to force the Famir to the negotiating table, and then from there they can either get them to willingly sign up, as long as the Famir get what they want out of it, or they can try and force them to ally them. But Famir are notoriously clever. They're very, very smart. They're cultured. They're civilized. I mean, they build these super fortresses that are hidden in the swamps of the world and protected by these, like, super sinister mist spells that make them virtually impossible to detect. But anyway, what I was going with that is that for their history, the Famir, after the old ones died or departed and the world was kind of empty, the Famir actually retook over most of the old world. So the Famir Empire was basically from the actual empire we know now. So, like, Marienburg, all across the Southern Empire, jump across the mountains, and then they owned all of the Southern Darklands all the way to the Kingdoms of End. So they had a huge empire, but then the High Elves showed up. So the Famir thought themselves safe, thought themselves the masters of the situation, and then the High Elves started exploring the world after, the demons vanished and the High Elves recovered. They started exploring the world. The dwarves started expanding north through the World's Edge Mountains, but it was primarily the High Elves that doomed the Famir Empire. They fought a bunch of super bitter wars against the High Elves because the primordial ancestors of men were not hard for the Famir to curb stomp. But the High Elves were a whole nother story. And Malekith and all of his, what's the word I'm looking for? All of the colonial armies that Malekith led through the old world, they were able to break the back of the Famir Empire. But even now, there are still many Famir fortresses secretly located in parts of the Empire. And there is a notable chunk of the Famir Empire that supposedly still flourishes. Man, I really struggled on that F. But there's a Famir Empire that's still functioning south of the Mountains of Morn. So if you ever look at a map, you'll kind of see the Haunted Forest. Like just east of the Haunted Forest is a whole bunch of nasty swamps. And that's where the strongest remaining portions of the Famir still stand to this day. Alright, next up. Man, this is going to drive me fucking crazy because I like to scroll to get where I'm going, but Spartan 9931. How typically big are ogre armies in the lore, and who has a better chance in wiping the ogre race out completely? So ogre armies in the lore traditionally range anywhere from 100 guys to 500 guys, depending on what they're trying to accomplish and like what they're mobilizing for and which tribe is mobilizing, or like if it's a combination of tribes. Very, very rarely do multiple tribes team up to do anything unless it's like a big deal situation, like if some cultural site has been attacked, like we talked a couple episodes ago about the Challenge Stone, which is that big old rock north of the Mountains of Morn. Whenever the Chaos Armies take that, then all the ogres will team up and go fight. But most of the time, just a single tribe will team up and go do something. So if you're going to get invaded in the Empire, for instance, or you're the dwarves or the border princes or whatever, if you have an ogre tribe coming down on you, you're looking usually in the ballpark of 100 ogres. If it's a really scary tribe, then maybe up to 500 ogres. Including their, like, big scary monsters, and nobody gives a shit about the Noblars, but there will always be a couple hundred Noblars with them, if not a couple thousand. But there's not a lot of them. Like, generally, there are very few ogres in a truly nasty army. But it's worth remembering that they're so big and strong, and they're so hard to kill for the average thing. Like, it takes... if you're an Imperial soldier, if you have anything less than a cannon or a demigryph knight or a like fully armored and skilled Reichsguard, you're gonna have a pretty hard time dealing with ogres. Even a unit of greatswords, like fighting ogre bulls, they'll do okay, but like Iron Guts, it's not gonna be a good time to be a greatsword. They will just chew you up. And so for, I realize it just doesn't sound like a lot of guys, but you just have to remember how absurdly powerful they are. And that's not even taking into account all the auxiliary shit they bring with them. Fighting one of these things, a Thunder Tusk, these are nightmare creatures. Like, they are dragon tier threats. And a single dragon can be a, like, notable death sentence for an entire city in Warhammer Fantasy, and these things are just as deadly. So, ogres, they're not going to show up with a lot of people. A lot of the time, if you're fighting a tribe that's invaded, you're probably going to see less than 3 digits of ogres, but that's still a shitload of ogres if you're not packing like a massive cannon battery or something. And it's worth noting that one of the big differences between the lore of Warhammer Fantasy and, say, like Total War is that although the technology to create black powder weapons exists, it is not as widespread as you may think. Like, having a genuine good cannon that's operable and having the people that are capable of like using it correctly is very rare in certain parts of the Empire, much less in places like the Border Princes or Tilia or Stalia or something. It is, you know, a lot of that stuff is not super recent technology, but creating a reliable version and having enough to really do something with it, you know, you're lucky, genuinely, if you have a single cannon ready to go. You know, it's not like, I know a lot of people have an aneurysm whenever they hear about the Battle of 100 Cannons, because they think, oh, that's nothing. Well, maybe for our world, that was not a lot, but in the Empire and for the dwarves and stuff like that, there's a lot of cultural barriers, a lot of financial barriers, a lot of transportation barriers that make it where a lot of those more sophisticated weapons that make things like ogres not a huge deal, very, very hard to get a hold of. You know, you have to remember the reason that crossbowmen and archers exist in the Empire is because a lot of armies cannot manage to have handgunners. Like, they don't have the handguns, they don't have the black powder, they don't have everything they need for it. Whether because they can't afford it or they just don't have the reliable technology to mass produce it, it can be very rare to come across more than like a single regiment of handgunners in an army, or a couple of them. That's why they tend to rely that's why you have such a wide span of technology. Because I know there are some people out there who are vaguely familiar with Warhammer Fantasy, and they don't understand that a lot of those really sophisticated and powerful technologies are not widespread. You know, if you're attacking Altdorf, yeah, sure, they're gonna have shitloads of that stuff. If you're attacking Nuln, yeah, sure, they're gonna have shitloads of stuff. But if you were attacking, if you were attacking through, let's say you came up through Blackfire Pass and you were attacking Averland, not Averheim itself, because Averheim is actually a really special city due to how paranoid Marius Leitdorf was. But if you were to attack any of the other major cities in that area, they would be blessed to have like a handful of siege weaponry, black powder weapons. You know, like cannons, mortars, Hellblaster volley guns, or the rocket batteries. If they had if they had double digits of those combined, they would be super lucky. So that's just an interesting thing worth noting. And I think that's like one of the things people struggle with ogres, is they think, I don't know, that's not a lot of ogres. It sounds like they'd kind of get curb stomped. Well, no, I mean, if you're having to defend your city with nothing more than crossbows, archers, halberds, swords, if you're lucky, some great swords, and maybe some Imperial Knights, that's not really gonna be enough, dude. Like, you're gonna need way bigger stuff and a lot more of it. I mean, you'll be blessed, you'll be super lucky if you even have a wizard on staff, you know? Anyway, hopefully that answers all that. As for the Impossible Whopper, ogres would not care that much. Synthetic meats would not bother ogres at all. Like, as long as it's the problem with ogres is just the amount you would have to give them once they saw the price of it. If you were charging, like, I haven't had an Impossible Whopper yet, but as long as it costs the same and you could mass produce enough of it to satisfy what they wanted at the time, yeah, sure, you could totally feed ogre. They would not care if the meat was synthetic. That being said, God help you if you don't have enough, because they are not picky. Oh wait, that was an answer to the last question. Sorry, I got super off track there. But Spartan9931, oh, the second half of your question was who could wipe them out. We already talked about this, and like if the races united, who would be the biggest threats. But the biggest threats to ogres generally are the greenskins and Skaven. Alright, and we're actually over time. So apologize for the lack of questions I got to today, but I really wanted to hammer home on the end times thing. That way we just don't have to answer any more end times questions unless they're hypotheticals. So hopefully we're done with that. And thank you all so much for watching. I do want to say I have been really appreciating all of the super nice words that everyone has been leaving down and stuff. Been working my butt off lately, trying to be a lot more consistent with uploads, and I'm glad to see that seems to be resonating really well with all you guys out there. So thanks again very much for watching. Once again, be sure to let me know what was your favorite tidbit that you learned today. I always really like seeing what everyone's favorite part of the video was, like their favorite lore fact they learned. And be sure to stop by later today to check out the next episode of the DLC proposal series, where we'll be talking about Heroes of Legend for the Beastmen. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you later today. Bye.